bum bum bottom 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 bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da 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 bum bum bottom bum bum bottom ba da da 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 ba 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 doobie doobie da da bum bum ba.
You are now in session with the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast. I'm Lisa Gullickson.
I'm Brad Gullickson.
And each month we evaluate a different iconic romance within the four-color realm. In this episode, we are rolling into Neo-Edo like we own the place.
Yeah.
And we're having our fluffy tales handed to us by an ornery yokai.
Oh, no.
In our Creator Corner, where we are talking to Stan Sakai and the creative force behind Samurai Rabbit, the Usagi Chronicles.
Happy Monday. What a start to the week. Stan Sakai on CBCC.
Brad, you are glowing. You are illuminated from the inside.
Oh, I've just touched the crystal and I've unleashed all the yokai. That's the reflection you're seeing, Lisa. Or it could be the glow of Free Comic Book Day this past Saturday on the 7th of May. Lisa and I did... basically a pub crawl of comic book shops.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the Fairfax store, the amazing comic shop in Virginia.
My first comic book store.
Yes. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they turned you away, remember?
They did. They were very rude.
They have new ownership now.
Huzzah!
Huzzah! And then after that, we went to Victory Comics in Falls Church. Then we crossed state lines into Annapolis, Maryland, and went to Third Eye Comics. And we rounded out our evening at our own shop, Big Planet Comics in Vienna, Virginia. It was so much fun.
It is one of the most wonderful times of the year.
It's a holiday, right? Like the day before, that night, I'm trying to go to sleep, and I felt like a child on Christmas Eve. Like, you know, Free Comic Book Day, it's coming down my chimney. It's going to give me so many great gifts. Have I given them enough cookies and milk? I hope so, that they reward me so well with so many rad comics. And I think like this year in particular had a great assembly of titles to choose from.
We've grabbed the Bone Orchard mythos, which we've talked to these guys, Jeff Lemire and Andrea Sorrentino.
Yeah, we have.
And, of course, we grabbed our copy of Galaxy, The Prettiest Star, even though I have already read it and love it, and you all have already read my interview with the creators, Jadzia Axelrod and Jess Taylor.
Yeah, Comics Bookcase, link in the show notes.
There is also 2 comic books illustrated by Andrea Muti, whom we almost had on the podcast.
But we did talk to Neil Clyde, the writer who collaborated with Muti about The Panic.
That's right.
And he's got 2 new titles, Nottingham and Bunny Mask Tales.
And of course, the art is amazing.
Oh yeah, it's so good. There was just so much.
But I want to talk about Tilly Walden's Clementine Walking Dead comic because we love Tilly Walden.
Yeah, we've talked about On a Sunbeam in the past. Tilly Walden doing The Walking Dead, that is just a combination I never thought we would ever see.
I love her art in black and white
Oh,
as well.
It's so good. I'm very excited about the graphic novel coming out later this year. Oh, but, you know, like, the thing about Free Comic Book Day, as much as we love grabbing all the freebies, right, and getting these previews to these rad storylines coming down the pike, it's about going to your shop, supporting them, buying some comics while you're there. And what I like about it so much is, you know, it does have this holiday feel. It feels like the Black Friday of comic book shops, where you walk in and it's just swamped with people and all age ranges.
And it's unlike Black Friday at the comic book shop because you're not there to get the deals. Like, a lot of the shops have deals, but we want to be at the store regardless because it is just buzzing with people who are excited about comics.
Yeah, and the conversations you have on Free Comic Book Day are some of the giddiest conversations that are possible in a shop. And it is an infectious environment, which is why we go from shop to shop to shop, crossing state lines to keep this feeling going. Mm-hmm. The other really cool thing that happened on Free Comic Book Day wasn't actually on Free Comic Book Day. We were talking to our friend Will. We were doing a Zoom thing for a secret project we'll talk about later. But we were talking with Will, and Will's like, hey guys, congratulations for getting name checked on the back of the Oni Press John and the Impossible Monsters issue.
And we were like, what?
I think I had some expletives in my reaction.
You did, and your mother heard them on Mother's Day.
She did. And sure enough, on the back of the comic, they're listing how John and the Impossible Monsters is the best comic of 2021. So say all these cool people: Entertainment Weekly, The Comics Journal, Film School Rejects, Comics Bookcase, and Comic Book Couples Counseling.
We were last. It's like they led up to us.
We were last, but we were right above Jeff Smith's most excellent quote on the back of that comic book. So seeing Comic Book Couples Counseling in print on the back of a Free Comic Book Day edition of John and the Impossible Monsters, one of our favorite comics out there right now from one of our favorite creative teams, the Somnies, Chris and Laura, that is like this warm hug. It's like, hey, this baby Brad and Lisa have created, not a flesh and blood baby.
Because those are gross.
Disgusting. No, this podcast baby you have created, it's real.
Oh my goodness. If my mom heard you calling our podcast a baby, she would be devastated.
Well, I'm sorry, Dottie, but Comic Book Couples Counseling is Brad and Lisa's baby.
And it's beautiful, and we love it.
Yeah.
We actually gave her a copy of Jonna with our names on the back. I'm like, that's us.
Look, we matter. We're doing things, Dottie. And she seemed pretty cool about it.
She's super supportive.
And she was really excited about John and the Impossible Monsters, which I was, surprised by.
Well, she loves anything all ages because she is easily scandalized.
Yes, that is true. That is true. So, a big weekend for us. I hope you all had a really wonderful and productive Free Comic Book Day. Already anticipating next year's event. Such a great time every year. And how do we transition into talking about Samurai Rabbit, Lisa?
I don't think we do transition, sweetheart. I think we just pivot. We just pivot to it because it's so cool.
It's very cool. Okay, so Usagiojimbo first came out in comics 1984. I, like a lot of folks, first encountered the character Miyamoto through the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. And over the years, I would pick up an issue of Usagiojimbo here and there. And I remember really loving Senso, the War of the Worlds mashup comic. And Lisa and I would go to the San Diego Comic-Con, and every year we would walk by Stan's booth, but I was always too nervous to approach and talk to Stan Sakai.
Because you didn't feel like you were big enough of a fan. Stan would shoot you a pop quiz and you wouldn't know enough.
Because with a character like Miyamoto Usagi, they've been around for so long. I never, I would pick and choose, but I never read from the beginning, so I never felt like I truly appreciated the work, and I didn't want to be a poser, which is such a silly, self-defeating attitude. And of course, I should have gone up to Stan Sakai, but I didn't. I had multiple opportunities, and I elected not to because of my shyness. And then the pandemic happens. I don't know if you heard this, guys. And lockdown occurred. And during lockdown, in those early days, that's when I decided to read everything. And I was able to do that thanks to our friends at Third Eye Comics. They had all the collections still on their shelves. I called them up, and they shipped all the Saga books, the Fantagraphics collection, to our house. And over the course of those 3 months, I read every single Usagiojimbo comic book. And Lisa, I couldn't shut up about it.
It took over our lives. So we would go on, especially when I was teaching remotely.
Right.
We would spend hours just stomping around our neighborhood on these long walks, and Brad would just describe Usagi books to me.
Yeah.
And it was so sweet.
It was so much fun. I love that memory of those long walks where I was just narrating Usagi's life. And then we decided we had to cover Miyamoto and Tomoe on Comic Book Couples Counseling, and links in the show notes. You can find those 4 episodes. Those are some some of my favorite conversations that we've had on this podcast, and I was finally able to rope Lisa into the Usagi Yojimbo clan.
Because Brad had done such a deep, focused reading, he was able to curate this really wonderful list of comics that focused on Usagi's relationship with one character,
right,
which was Tomoe Ame, who I've decided is his true love.
Right.
But Usagi is such an intricate tale that literally what we did was just like pick up one thread
Yes.
in a rope.
Yes.
And I feel like Usagi is the kind of narrative where you could do that for his relationship with any character.
Yes. Usagi Yojimbo is a relationship saga. It's not just Miyamoto. It's about how he relates to all these supporting players, and you develop intense feelings for all of those dynamics, right? And, you know, over the course of our relationship with the characters, we've developed a very precious attitude toward them and how they should be portrayed, right? And, you know, while the character has been adapted in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics over every Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon, there's been multiple versions of that character. There was like a brief moment where we might even have a space Usagi cartoon, and that didn't quite happen. And then, you know, the adaptation has been on the horizon for so long. When is it going to occur? When is it going to occur? And now here we are, 2022, and we have Samurai Rabbit, the Usagi Chronicles, but it's not quite an adaptation of Usagi Yojimbo, which I know causes some people some concern and some like anxiety, but I'm here to tell you, you know, all 10 episodes of the first part of this series are available on Netflix. We've watched all of them. And it's a pretty darn great show.
Well, because I think it does go with that thread idea, where they pick up a thread in Usagi's legacy that is way down the line.
Yes.
So the TV show centers around a character, Yuichi, who is a couple generations removed from Miyamoto Usagi.
Yes, yes.
And because of that, he has his own narrative that is connected but still separate from the story that we know.
And we talk about this in this conversation with Stan and the art director Kong Lee, as well as the showrunners Candie and Doug Langdale. That idea, like that divergence, really gives the audience a freedom to just enjoy this thing as its own thing, because you're released from like having to critically analyze, is this Stan Sakai's world and characters?
When we first found out it was going to be child-centric, that this was going to be a TV show for kids, we were wary.
Sure.
Because one of the things we love about Usagiojimbo is that it's so violent.
Yeah,
and
Miyamoto,
so many people die.
Yeah, he stands on
Every
a
single
giant
issue.
stack of bodies.
Yeah. And so we're like, how can you portray that in a child-friendly way? And then we're like, okay, so he's killing robots? That's like not cool.
And that's not really what they do. Like, that was our worry. There is like actual stakes in this show, and there are deaths. You do see someone get impaled on a sword via shadow.
But for me, as a fan of the original comic, what I think is so special about this TV show is that the comic and the information that is in the comic is revered, but separate. So I think that for the young fan, it will create this kind of curiosity for the original source material. And I think a lot of the children watching this comic are watching this TV show are going to grow up and look for those volumes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think there is a really fascinating conversation happening in Samurai Rabbit about honor and legacy, and how Miyamoto is perceived by his ancestor Yuichi versus how the rest of Neo-Edo and Japan understand that history and mythology as well. They might not line up. And I think that schism provides a lot of narrative depth that I was not anticipating originally when I heard about this show.
It's really a show about heroism.
Yes.
And what we choose or how we choose to remember someone, and how that idea becomes inflated the more removed we are from the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what you're going to hear in this conversation, it's broken up into two parts. We first talked to Stan Sakai and Kong Lee together on one Zoom call. And you know, of course, like, I was very nervous about like, oh, I just want to talk to Stan. I just want to talk to Stan about his beautiful creation. How are we going to work Kong Lee into it? But Kong Lee also an incredibly interesting human being. And he joined the call before Stan did. And so we got some time with him before we chatted with Stan off mic. And he is very much like us, a big nerd for Stan Sakai, and was very concerned about adapting this comic work and creating some kind of connective tissue from what Samurai Rabbit is and what Usagi Yojimbo is.
What I found so sweet about this first conversation is how Stan and Kong connected as visual artists. And the thing that got Stan Sakai excited about this new interpretation of his work was seeing Kong Lee's art.
Yes.
And like, it was just that mutual respect that got like the engines really rolling.
Yeah. And so you're going to hear that conversation, and then that conversation is going to roll into our second chat, which was with Candie Langdale and Doug Langdale, the showrunners of Samurai Rabbit, and getting into, you know, their nerves and their excitement around this very special adaptation.
And they're an actual married couple, which makes this our second Love Seat edition.
Yeah, right after the Somnies, we now have the Langdales. So yeah, we're very excited. We hope you're excited to hear this conversation.
I think we should also mention that we had only seen the first 2 episodes when we talked to Stan and Kong. And and I'm just saying that defensively because the full season had not dropped yet. So we were working from screeners, and a lot of my questions had to do with the setup of Yuichi's character. And Stan keeps going like, well, that gets resolved fairly quickly in this season. And I was like, oh, okay. And then when we got to talk to the Langdales, it was the day after the full season got dropped. And we spent that morning just binging the entire season. And so we had way more information when we talked to them.
Yeah, I think it makes for a really good like break point between these two chats. Like that way the second half of this episode doesn't really repeat anything from the first half, or it clarifies some of those concerns we had in the first half. Enjoy the conversation. If you have been a little weary about checking out Samurai Rabbit, I think this chat will convince you to do so. If you've been like us reveling in Samurai Rabbit, I think this will just continue the celebration. But that's enough from us. I know some of you out there are saying, Brad and Lisa, please be quiet. We're here for Stan Sakai. Okay, we will finally silence ourselves and get on with the interview. Here you are.
Yeah, well, I see you have a Space Usagi t-shirt.
Yes, I do. I had to dress for this interview. And I have your Mondo prints up on the wall in front of me. I have original Usagi art on my right. Long time Usagi fans.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, of course. All right. So we're ready. Enough fanning? Put
Brad
it all out
was
there.
telling me he was going to play it really cool.
Okay.
He's already spoiled that, but
all right.
Well, you blew that.
I did. Let's get started then. 3, 2, 1. Stan and Kang, thank you so much for joining us in the Love Nest. Welcome to Comic Book Couples Counseling.
Well, thank you. We're glad to be here.
And Kang, you know, I thought we could start with you because as we were talking a little bit off mic, we were very nervous going into the Samurai Rabbit series. You know, we treat these comics, as fans sometimes do, very preciously. And we were nervous going into it. And we came out of it very relieved. I think your experience with Usagi Yojimbo is similar to ours. What was it like coming onto this project and adapting Stan's iconic work?
Yeah, first of all, we really love Stan's work. Very much entire team, from design to CG team in India. Everyone loves the show, and you can see that we produce really great artwork because everyone's really interested in it. So for me, it's the same thing. Is I already love Stan's work, and as long as Stan is behind us, it doesn't matter what it is. We'll make sure that it stays true to what Stan has envisioned and the world that he already built. We're only piggybacking on this project. And at first, the concept of this being in the future might seem a little strange. One of the things that we were able to do was incorporate a more traditional element from feudal Japan alongside something that's very modern. And visually, you can find that Neo Edo, which is, as Stan explained, is a new Edo, pretty much. So with that, you have very traditional element, Japanese architecture, combined with things that you find in modern day, everyday life. Like for example, Tokyo, which is modern Edo, hence Neo Edo. For example, skyscrapers, vending machines, which are extremely popular in Japan, especially if you're walking around Tokyo, every couple of steps you can find a vending machine of all kinds. So we have a lot of those. We have a lot of signage. So it's a good balance between having, these kind of architecture that you're used to seeing in samurai films. Suddenly, you also see some of more relatable elements from modern day life, and finding the balance to put those two things together. We have this sort of complete universe for Yuichi Usagi, which is a descendant of Miyamoto. And that's kind of like a mirror of what we're doing now too. Stan is Miyamoto, we are Yuichi. So in a way, it worked pretty well for the concept.
So, for us as longtime Miyamoto fans, the idea of going into Samurai Rabbit into the future with the Descendant, with Yuichi, was actually kind of like this brilliant move because it offers some freedom for us as viewers to accept the adaptation process. Stan, how early into this series was that the concept?
Pretty early on, actually. Because this series is geared for a younger audience. I mean, cartoons, for most cartoons are. And so taking it out of, taking the focus away from my Miyamoto Usagi and onto a descendant, I thought it was a great move. However, like you, I was a bit hesitant. But, Kang's it's probably tired of me me saying this. I mean, he hears it every time I talk to him, but it was his designs that actually convinced me, oh, this is going to work. That first drawing he did of Neo Edo, I mean, that just, oh my gosh, this is great. It's gonna look fantastic. And, that's what really turned the corner for me, saying that, well, at first, it's not the Usagi, but however, then I saw his designs. Oh my gosh, this is going to be great. And not to say that my Usagi is not in it, because my Usagi does play a prominent role throughout the entire episodes. And what Doug and Candie did with my character is just genius.
What I find so special about the adaptation and the way Miyamoto Usagi plays in this story is that it's going to create a curiosity for the original work, because we have these beautiful flashback scenes that I think young readers, when they get a little older and they can deal with all of the piles of bodies that are created in every issue, I think that they're going to run to those stories. And I also like the juxtaposition of Miyamoto Usagi is such a humble individual for most of the time that we know him. Somebody with Miyamoto Usagi's story in their future is a very humble and open person, where Yuichi, it has Miyamoto Usagi in his past. And because those stories are in the past, he is like tremendously brash and confident. He feels like he doesn't need a master. And I was wondering, like, do you feel like a young Miyamoto Usagi would relate to Yuichi?
Yuichi is very much like a young Miyamoto Usagi in that he's very, like you say, he's brash, he's impulsive. I mean, and he, like all people that age, they know it all, they can do it all. But then he finds that his confidence is not where it should be. It's his abilities are not true to what he thinks. And so that's a big revelation to him. Say, hey, I at first I didn't think I needed a sensei. I want a sensei, but I want the best. And he does find it. But Usagi Yuichi is a great character. He changes throughout the entire. You can see his development, and I think that's wonderful. It's to see how the characters change, how they're very dynamic. And this is a very character-driven show. The artwork is fantastic, but the focus is on the characters.
In your current series for IDW, you've introduced Yukuichi. Thank you. He feels a little bit like a character that's in conversation with Yuichi in Samurai Rabbit. Was he created for that purpose?
To some extent, I've always for a long time, I wanted to introduce a new character, a younger version of Usagi. So Usagi can be the mentor, and that's what he's doing to Yukichi. And I think they have a nice pairing because now Usagi's the more mature person, and Yukichi is the student that's learning how to be a real samurai, learning how to honor and loyalty above all things. And his swordsmanship is pretty good. However, it's not quite the level of Usagi's. So they're wandering by them together, and they're learning from each other.
One thing that I find really engaging about the story Usagi Yojimbo is that like his Bushido code, he's always returning to it and considering it. Do you feel like him having someone like Yuki will help him codify his code even further?
Very much so. And Usagi's had some issues with the Bushido code for a while, such as not too long ago, he went to his old master's grave and asked, I know that a samurai is loyal to the master, but you've been dead a while. My life has changed. I want to be released from this obligation of loyalty to you. And he's working that out too. That's part of the Bushido code that he's working through. And now I think further on down the line, you'll see him changing even more. And that's a lot because he's traveling with Yuki.
One thing that I think is defining Miyamoto Usagi is that he has his own code, but he doesn't mind like hanging out with people like Gen or like Kitsune that have a different code than him. He's like very
more than different, like opposing.
Yeah, like but he still, can have a friendship with them and respect them and go and people are very open about what they believe with Usagi. And now in Samurai Rabbit, we see these characters again. We see Gen, we see Kitsune. My fingers are crossed for Tomoe. Here's hoping. So are these, should we consider these to also be descendants, or now are they kind of like almost like commedia dell'arte, like archetypal characters?
Well, I like to think of them as descendants because like Gen, my Gen was a bounty hunter. This Gen is also a bounty hunter. But they've also added to the character, such as Gen is he's big and gruff. He's a rhinoceros, but then he's a hypochondriac, which is very against type. I mean, he gets a small little cut on his hand, on his finger, and I've got to go to the doctor. I've got to wrap it up. I need my shots, and all of these characters. Chizu, the ninja, the Neko ninja, she has her own backstory about growing up being kidnapped as a child and learning how to become a ninja. Kitsune, the thief, has her own backstory as well. And it's nice how the characters are so well-rounded, and they overcome their difficulties in the past. In some instances, their difficulties make them even stronger than they would be. And it's a nice group. And that's what it is. As I said, it's a character-driven show. And it shows how these diverse characters, at first, they can't stand each other and how they come together. And it's a nice group dynamic where they're learning from each other and they're contributing to each other. And these are people that had no sense of family whatsoever, almost being abandoned, being kidnapped, being Usagi is the only, or Yuichi is the only one that had a sense of family. He had a grandmother.
Yeah, the family of the comics and how it is replicated in the series is one of the most attractive things for me. And I'm curious, Kang, for you, when you were adapting these designs, these characters, their internal life as well as their external life, like what is critical in that transfer process from comic to screen?
Oh, that's a tough question, actually. We had to do a lot of iterations and trying to find one that worked visually, but also for the story and the world that we built too. So there's a lot of kind of variables that kind of determine that. But ultimately, if it feels good online, if the characters behave, act consistently, and you believe, like that's not just a figure that's moving on screen, but that's a living being. Like Gen, for example, I just love him because he reacts to things very specific to his nature, and there's humor to it, but there's also a little bit of imposingness to his looks. It's just a very sweet kind of character, and you see his arc throughout the story, but his personality is very clear. Like, oh yeah, that's a person behind there. It's not a cartoon character, and that's true for pretty much all our characters in the show. And that's what I was really amazed at is, you look at them, regardless of what they look like on screen too. Whether they wear a jacket or armor. It's really their behavior and their acting, and I think that's the character-driven part that Stan mentioned that worked really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
Is they are memorable characters. So even if Usagi wears something else, if he has patches on his eyes or something, it would still be Usagi, because the character is so well built and well acted.
And they've gone beyond my cast of characters and created new characters that also contribute to the entire storyline. So I'm so happy with the series.
I'm so happy that you're so happy, and I'm so happy that I'm so happy with the series. But I am curious about when you're in the development stages and you are overseeing the tiny changes and the ways that it adheres to your characters. Were there moments where you're like, that maybe is like a change too far, or something that didn't quite feel like something that was honest to your creation, Stan?
Well, the writers, Doug and Candie, were great. They're the showrunners, and the twist with my Usagi is one that I never thought of, and they cleared it with me before they actually started writing about it. And I thought when they said, we want to do this with your Usagi, I thought, oh my gosh, that's incredible. That's a great idea. Go with it. So I was always consulted even before. Whenever they had questions, then I was always consulted before they committed anything to paper. So any conflicts were very minimal.
Yeah. Those sequences, the Miyamoto sequences that we've seen so far, and the way that they're rendered in a different animation style is like one of the great pleasures of Samurai Rabbit. And for you, Kang, what was it like capturing those designs and that style versus what the Prime storyline style looks like, aesthetic?
Oh, this question is much more comfortable for me. I'd love, one of the best part of the show are those 2D sequences, and it's purely done in-house in our Paris team, and they were amazing. Just a little backstory, because the Stan's comic is pen and ink, and the show is in CG. So having these sort of moments is just perfect for the styling. And go back to that point where Stan is Miyamoto, we are his descendant, representing Yuichi. then the style, we want to harken back to something that is more traditional, like pen and ink wash, a little bit of watercolor sort of look. So it just fits perfectly with that. CG is very modern, it's mainstream type of design. Then you have something that's very traditional, ink wash, sumi ink kind of style, was very reminiscent of old Japanese paintings and brushwork. Not only that, it kind of mirrors what Stan does with his comic as well. Things that you cannot replicate in CG, things that only a pen, ink on paper could do. So we try to get that feeling back in by having these moments. It also gives us a little break in terms of style. If we're telling a different type of story and a different timeline, it just fits perfectly with that kind of moment. But aside from that, too, budget. It does save us, some CG budget to have those extra stuff built in CG would cost a lot as well. And we actually had a very specific artist doing those inking. He's actually a mural artist. This is beautiful giant brushwork mural in France, and he happens to also work in animation. So a friend of ours who is the supervising character designer, Baptiste, he called Antoine, who's our inking artist, and he does all the inking for those sequences. It's very harmonized, very unique, and it's someone who understands the brushwork really well. That was one of the special things. Of course, the whole thing is very special, but Antoine just added that extra touch to the look.
I love the brushwork. So it's very dynamic and it's rough, and it's a nice contrast between Yuichi's world and Miyamoto Usagi's world. So it's just terrific.
Well, those sequences come in
a little bit more gritty too, so that's why the visuals we try to make it a little more textured, as opposed to the CG smoother look.
There's a
it's
moment
a little more softer nowadays.
There's a moment in the second episode where there's a flashback to a more sinister interpretation of Miyamoto, and we've seen this kind of look on Miyamoto in the comics in the past, but like when that happened in the second episode, I was startled and moved by it, and just immediately curious and also accepting of the adaptation process.
The interesting thing to me about that is it's a comment on how stories do change, just like everything that was heroic and honorable about Miyamoto Usagi is amplified. So are the things that are terrifying and perhaps not exactly true, or a worry or concern also becomes amplified.
And how that's highlighted by different perspectives. Like Miyamoto in someone's eyes is one thing, and Miyamoto in another person's eyes is something totally different.
Exactly, yeah.
What I wonder is, because Yuichi exists with the idea of Miyamoto, can he not then, will his story by necessity diverge from that same path? Because you'd think that the ultimate fulfillment of his character would be to be more like his ancestor, but by knowing who his ancestor is, he has to become his own person. Does that make sense?
That's true, yeah, that's true. He like I keep saying, he becomes his own person, and he worships his ancestor. But there's a few things that occur that indicates Usagi is not, the original Usagi is not the, I was going to say the man, but the rabbit that he thought he was. So there is changes. And I should mention about the yokai. The series, these things take place with the yokai. It's a world of yokai. And yokai are the haunts, the monsters, the spooks and goblins of Japanese folklore. And Japan, for such a small country, has such a rich and diverse tradition of yokai, of folklore. And it's not just the really scary, horrific things, but it's also the really goofy stuff too, like the umbrella with the that hops around, or the waraji sandals with eyes and teeth, and it's fun. I love doing stories about yokai, and I was so pleased to see yokai involved in this story.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what the show seems to maintain this curiosity. I'll use that word again, that curiosity for mythology and history that Usagi Yojimbo has had. And when you're a reader, you would then go and research and explore. And I've always loved your story notes around those comics. And so it does feel like a gateway story. And Samurai Rabbit feels like a gateway story.
That's another thing about Yuichi is that, like we said, he's very confident. He's a know-it-all. And he thinks all yokai are evil because his ancestor, Usagi, battled yokai. But then he finds, well, maybe they're not all as bad as he thought. So he keeps maturing and changing as he experiences more things.
So in your experience, Stan, with collaborating on Samurai Rabbit with all these incredibly talented people, has it opened you up to the idea of allowing more people to play around with Miyamoto Usagi? Because, famously, that character is yours. And that's why we're a little nervous when other people, play with our toys, play with your toys. But you've been doing variant covers and things like that lately. And, how are you feeling?
I've always enjoyed seeing other artists' interpretation of my Usagi. In fact, at one time I had proposed a series called Usagiojimbo Kagemusha, Shadow Warriors, in which other creators would write and draw Usagi stories, maybe an anthology series of maybe 5 or 6 issues. And that's something I still would love to do. And, this is probably my biggest collaboration, ever with the entire Samurai Rabbit, the Usagi Chronicles, because, we had a whole team of writers, artists, designers. I was getting approval or notices for everything, like broccoli or rocks. I could approve things like that. Other things were these ships, it's huge flying ships, literally flying ships. And my first thought, oh my gosh, I would love to have a toy of that. Or the play sets. Oh my gosh, the cityscapes that Kang came up with, or even it's just incredible. I would love it to go beyond just the animated series and do toys and comic books and everything.
Like, I love the design of the robots in Samurai Rabbit, and it reminds me of stories like Senso or Space Usagi, this idea of like steam powered enormous robots. And I was just wondering what designing those robots was like.
So that's Kang and the design team.
Yeah.
Actually, there was an inspiration that we were looking at. It's called Robot Carnival. I don't know if you've seen the anime. There were these giant robots who were that made of wood and very analog gear that's propelling them. So that was definitely a big influence for us. And also we needed robots because if we have flying ships, why not? They also have functions to them. The robot that you may have seen is, they might purpose construction, they might purpose the farm, they might purpose, many other things too. So they're not just robots there for visuals, but they're doing something for the city. They're part of everyday life.
Well, they're fabulous, as Lisa mentioned. Stan and Kang, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would want mentioned before we get out of here?
Show you.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I've been working on pages. This is a page I'm currently working on, and I don't know if you can see it. It has the Usagi fighting the Bat Ninjas off. They're on the edge of a cliff, or literally, the Bat Ninjas will be part of this series. And it's kind of neat. I love how they incorporated the blades into the wings. So, man. This is actually the next page. It's not as done. I just started on this page here, so there's still a lot of the pencils left and a lot of inking to do. But I thought you'd get a kick out of this.
I get more than a kick out of it, Stan. That is a true delight. Thank you so much.
I
little
love it when there
preview.
are other species. Like whenever I see like Lord Hebby, I'm like so like disoriented because I'm not used to I'm so used to mammals. And then
Yeah.
for bats to come up, it's
And
just like
birds.
and snakes.
We've had some birds recently. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I'm going to have links in the show notes of this episode, but just in case people don't click on those links, is there anywhere that we can point them towards to continue this conversation with you?
And I have my own website, stansakai.com. So
I know it well. All right. Well, again, thank you for hanging out with us. You have a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to more episodes of Samurai Rabbit.
thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
guys. Have a good one.
And you as well. Doug and Candie, thank you so much for joining us at Comic Book Couples Counseling. Welcome to the Love Nest.
Thank you.
Thank
It's an
you.
honor to be here.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to be talking to the two of you. We just finished watching the 10th episode of Samurai Rabbit, and I am so relieved to tell you that I loved the show.
Oh,
So
good.
much anxiety going into watching something that's an adaptation of something we hold so precious, and to see it done so well with such love, it really warmed our hearts.
That's great.
Thank you so much.
So I figured where we could start is the same place that we started with Stan and Kang, talking about the decision to not directly adapt Usagiojimbo, but to do sort of your own story set on the timeline of Usagiojimbo, but to follow Yuichi as he is reckoning with his legacy. When did that fall into place exactly?
That decision was made before we were brought on. Netflix wanted a kids show, and I believe it was felt there was not a good way to do a kids show and still honor the original comic book.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of murder.
they felt that it would be best to, to give it its own a spin-off.
So, but that, I mean, the decision had already been made when we started to set it in the future and to do it like a younger, more enthusiastic and less jaded,
Less
version.
developed.
Yeah, less developed version of the character, and like sort of follow him. It's not the same character; it's a descendant of Miyamoto Usagi, but to sort of follow him on his journey to becoming someone like Miyamoto Usagi.
But we wanted to make every effort to keep Miyamoto alive in the show. So we found a way to work him in.
Yes. I mean, technically, you see Miyamoto before you see.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we wanted, like, right from the start to say, we know, yes, Usagiojimbo is a great thing, and we're doing essentially a spin-off
Yes.
of that.
But we love him too. So
I think for me, what was so brilliant about that decision was how it gave me the freedom to just relax and watch the show. Whereas if it had been a direct adaptation, I would be like really scrupulous about it.
Right.
And I would imagine just creatively that would also free the two of you up to develop it.
yes.
Yes.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was so great of Stan to let us like take a little distinct corner of his universe and play around.
Yeah, he
in it
let
for a
us
while.
play in his world for
Yes.
a little bit.
What were the challenges of maintaining the spirit of Sakai's work in this new world? What was the thing that you had to hurdle? And then when did it click for you?
I mean, there was a lot of research, but not really, not the kind of research where you're looking for specific facts, but more like, let's just read a bunch of stuff. Let's watch a bunch of movies. Let's watch a bunch of videos.
Read his comic books.
Read Usagi
reread
Yojimbo,
everything. I think the thing that really helped was not having screens or computers or cell phones, even though it's the future, it's an alternate future. So I think that helped keep the feel.
Yeah, I mean,
more.
it allows you to create this world that feels like it has a connection to our world, but it's definitely not.
Mm.
There's no one's on their phone. There are no phones. There's no screens. There's no electronics at all. And yet there still are, basically flying cars and giant robots and stuff, because it's all, futuristic brute force technology with no electronics.
I want to live there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I love how even without the pervasive existence of screens like we have in our present, there is this ongoing conversation about how history, how news is propagated in relation to the character of Miyamoto, because of course Yuichi is like, well, this is my ancestor. He was this yokai killer. He was clearly a hero. But in this city, there is the idea that he was a villain. And it's Yuichi throughout the story trying to essentially streamline how he is going to feel about Miyamoto.
I mean, it's all our Usagi is almost like the opposite of a conspiracy theorist. He's coming into this new place and finding out that no one's belief about history matches his belief. And of course, I guess it's not is it a spoiler yet?
Well, all the episodes are available, or at least all 10.
The first 10.
All 10, yeah.
Oh, his name is cleared in the 10.
Okay.
Yes.
So I mean, he Usagi turns out to be right and proves it to everyone, but he's really come into this place where he's the lone voice saying, no, history isn't what you think it is. This guy you see as a villain was a great hero.
And that was a fun day. Very humbly going to Stan. Excuse me, sir, may we please do a thing? And so we got permission to do
no, he really loved it.
Can we sully your character for a little bit? But he was very generous with us.
But yeah, I mean, it's not 100% spelled out in the show as it occurs, but the theoretical storyline in the past is that Miyamoto actually sacrificed his legacy in order to protect Japan.
Yeah, a lot of that didn't make it to the script, but he knew he was going to ruin his reputation, and he did it anyway because for the good of the world. Yeah, he knew he was saving the world. So yeah.
But I feel like Yuichi also didn't he had to come to understand that he didn't also have the whole truth, because he was carrying this prejudice against the yokai. And those of us who have read Usagi Yojimbo know that one of his sensei was in fact a yokai, or a demon character.
Yeah, that's a big part of the arc of the series, is him realizing that these people, basically, who he had always seen as monsters, are people.
We got to talk to Stan yesterday before we got to see all 10 episodes. We were only given the first 2, but he seemed really excited about you coming to him about doing something with Miyamoto Usagi that had never been done before. And I think that's significant, considering that he has been thinking about this character continuously for so many years.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people have played in his playground the way that you all have.
Yeah, it was a huge honor.
Yeah.
So my question to you would be, as you are humbly going before Stan, talking about some of these changes, these ideas that you have, the way that he made it seem was he was thrilled and was so willing to adapt. Was there ever any kind of pushback at all, or what were those conversations even like, those initial ones?
You mean solely about Miyamoto's past?
Well, Miyamoto's past, and I guess also just sort of you're also playing with descendants of his entire supporting cast, or a large chunk of his supporting cast.
He seemed to enjoy And I mean, there is this separation. These are not Stan's characters, they're
Mhm.
descendants. So he gave us leeway. He
was super supportive.
yes.
And I think, I mean, he was saying actually at the premiere last night that he's so used to working alone. It was just a fun experience for him to get to like collaborate with a big group of people and be involved in this thing that's, you know, that eventually had, I don't know what, hundreds of people working on it over multiple continents.
Yeah.
But
he's protective of his property, but he's not like overprotective of it. He had a nice balance of, we're gonna keep Miyamoto safe, but here you can have fun with him too.
But even when he wanted changes, he's so nice about it. It's like, just want to point out that if you fold the garment this way as you have it, it means the character is dead. Fold the fold it the other way.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I think, you know, as a longtime reader of Usagi Yojimbo comics, I get the impression or the wrong impression because he hasn't had so many people play with his characters that he is very tight with how they should behave. But in talking to him the other day, he seemed now very open to the idea of other artists coming in and possibly doing more comics. And I got the impression that it was through your collaboration with him that you kind of, you know, opened his eyes to the possibilities.
Maybe we softened him up for everybody else. I don't know.
I hope so. I mean, we just were trying to be absolutely respectful of the work that he's been doing for so long and like such amazing work. We didn't want to come in with people who come in and start fiddling up everything that you've done, you know. And I think he really enjoyed the process, and it was great for us getting to work with him. So, you know, I can only hope that we made him happy.
Yeah, I hope so. We finally met in person last night, and he was so nice.
Yeah. That was your first meeting?
Yes,
first in-person meeting.
Yeah. So we've been talking to him for a few years on Zoom, and to finally get to meet him in person, I was like, he was so nice.
We never had a meeting with Stan. We had one meeting on the show, and they were like, okay, your office is going to be over there. And then the next day, everything shut down.
Oh, of course.
So the entire series, except for that first meeting, was done remotely.
Man, that's nuts.
To me,
last night at the premiere, we were just like walking around going, Eric's tall? That was the whole evening.
It's like, look at you. It was crazy.
I just find the realm of animation to be so magical and extraordinary because it really is just the convergence of ideas. The places don't exist, the characters don't exist, and all of this collaboration creates space, creates
something tangible.
And especially with over the course of the pandemic, not being able to get together except for in the realm of ideas. Like I know that you guys have been working in animation for a long time. Is there something you find kind of magical about animation and creating something from nothing?
Yeah, I mean, it
ceases to amaze.
It is exactly that. You start with nothing but ideas, and then you never really make anything. It remains ideas all the way through the process. I mean, now like people are rarely even physically drawing on paper. It's all ones and zeros.
I just love that point when in the middle of the production, my heart bursts open because I realize that the characters are now real and they feel real to me. And I know they're not. We started them out on paper, but there's that moment when I believe that they're real.
There's that you get to that point where you're like writing a scene in a script and you're just like, honey, Chizu won't let me do this. Chizu says no, she would not do this. We got to figure out another way to do it.
Yeah, they definitely, you start feeling like you are watching them and taking dictation instead of commanding their directions.
Yeah.
And that's when it truly feels magical.
Mm-hmm.
As a creative couple ourselves, I'm very interested in how the two of you work. You know, this idea of like, honey, Chizu won't let me do something. I want to explore that a little bit more. Like, you know, at least you two had each other in the creative process while you were doing this over the last 2 years, zooming and ones and zeros and all that stuff. Can you talk a little bit more? Can you extrapolate about that specific relationship that you two have?
I feel like when we're working on a project together, it sort of becomes our life, and that's what we talk about all the time in the car, over dinner, and
hopefully not in an unhealthy way.
But it's funny how we talk about them like they're real people, and then we start noticing things about them that we didn't put in there, and it's like
it is weird. Like now people would be like, who wrote this line? And we're like, I guess Usagi wrote it. I like have no idea where that came from.
Yeah, but we tend to work a lot of different ways. Sometimes one of us will start and the other one will pass it back and forth. Sometimes we sit and come up with everything together. Also, once the voice actors start, that takes the characters in a different direction, because the voice actors bring something new to the character. It starts becoming more real and bigger. When the artists, when the animatics start coming in, that definitely influences the direction of the rest of the show.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be a collaborative process with the actors as well as the artists. I mean, I come from a theater background, so I'm never going to want to come in and tell any of the actors that something has to be done a certain way. It's like, this is one way to do it, but like, what ideas do you have? Like, and then as you start recording the show in those first few episodes, you see what the strengths of the actors are, and you try to, play as much as you can into those. And then our collaboration is, I mean, it's weird because on this show, the collaboration happened at the same time as being shut off from the rest of the world. So like, I mean, we're together all of the time, 24 hours a day.
That's with our imaginary friends.
And so I mean, I feel like so much of creating the show is just like us talking about stuff. Like that's 90% of the work, and then someone goes and types for a little bit.
Yeah, I know for like Lisa and myself, the only time we ever get frustrated with each other is when we are discussing the business of our creative endeavors that we do. We can get so passionate about our points of view, and then having to collaborate and be married. It's so challenging.
Yeah, for sure. I don't like the business end of things. I just want to point out a lot of story points also came out in the writers summit with our group of writers, and Ben, the supervising producer, contributed a lot to the story. So
and the whole look that Kang Lee came up with.
So I'm not saying it was just Doug and
right, of course.
the story. There was a group of people.
Well, I don't want to leave this conversation without talking about the style, the visual language, and the design of this story, because it is so unique, and the way that it deals with the past visually versus the present is maybe the great surprise of the entire series. Can you talk about differentiating Miyamoto's history versus Yuichi's present?
Well, I mean, a big part of creating the world of the show was trying to create a future Japan and a future world, not just Japan, that sort of minimizes European influences. So it's as if, in feudal Japan, they got this tremendous source of power, the keystone, and the world, like history developed differently from that point. Also, they were talking animals.
Yeah.
But apart from that, so they weren't like bringing in influences from other parts of the world so much. It's just feudal Japan in the future. And I mean, there's a little bit in there, but for the most part, we tried to keep it to historical Japanese influences.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had our own ideas when we first started. We wanted it to look like, medieval Japanese buildings that got taller and were added onto over the years. And so we're like, okay, well, let's explain this to the artists.
Yeah.
And then we met Kang and we were and saw his first drawings, and we were like, never, you got this. We don't need to say
talk
anything
about this so much.
Yeah. So
but Kang had come up with that idea of the modular city where it's all built out of pieces that can be moved around, which was
genius.
A brilliant idea from a budgetary standpoint, if no other reason, just to be able to, like, if you need a new street, you can build it out of the pieces that you have. And he also, I think he was the one who introduced the idea that there are a lot of streets that don't meet at right angles and a lot of levels, so there are steps up. So you can never see very far into the distance in the city, so you don't have to constantly be rendering all this stuff some mile away because there's a building there.
Yeah.
So it was very budget friendly, but it also gives it this very populated feel where there's lots of information on the screen and signage, and there's no text in the series, but all the advertisements and stuff.
Yeah, very full frames in Samurai Rabbit.
Yeah.
I love this idea of like isolating a concept of the past and then extrapolating that out. And I think that was also very much reflected in the music by Aiko Fukushima. I think the score is just absolutely like, because it does, you get that sense of like those traditional instruments, but then like those instruments like extrapolated in like a modern way. But how did it feel getting that resourcing and then getting that music?
Yeah, it was so incredible. Through the whole show, we were always like, we want to keep the past alive. We want to keep the past alive. And I mean, she nailed it with the music.
And she, I mean, some of the musicians on this are like fairly famous traditional instrument musicians, the Yoshida brothers, the shamisen players, and they're like real. I mean, so many shows I've worked on are all synth. There's no actual musicians in there, but there's a lot of real performance in this, and a lot of traditional instruments. And every now and then they would be like, we have this instrument we want to use. It sounds really great. It's not actually Japanese, it's Indian. And it's like, that's fine. We don't have to be, like, let's get the sound. But it has that sound of, these older instruments that feel like they bring history with them.
You totally feel that, like a real instrument, and it's all of its unpredictable resonance, like that chaotic thing that only comes from nature. You can totally hear that in the score. It just pops.
When we watch animated shows, so often where they skimp on is the score. And here in Samurai Rabbit, we're like, well, where's our album? I need the LP.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, like, oh man, I wish we had done full versions of some of the songs, particularly in the next 10 episodes.
There's some really
some
great stuff in there.
It gets even more amazing as it goes along. I just want to say.
Well, that's I want to talk about that before we go. So 10 episodes are out now, streaming on Netflix. Another 10 episodes in the future.
Yes, but I imagine it won't be too far away. They're finishing up the last few episodes right now.
Okay.
So
it
shouldn't be too long.
Can you give us a hint without spoiling anything of how the story will continue?
There is an overarching that keeps going. and there are some new things. So there will be some things that get tied up.
All right.
I think Allie might shut the power off.
Yeah. I appreciate it. And I had to try a little bit. I'm very excited at the possibility of more Samurai Rabbit, especially in the continuing conversation with legacy and honor and all of that good stuff. But Doug and Candie, thank you so much for joining us and chatting Samurai Rabbit. We are over the moon for this series, and we're just so excited that it's finally out there. We've been anticipating it for such a long time. I can't imagine how it's been for you anticipating this series. So a big congratulations to you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
this has been really great.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, yay.
Thank you.
On that note, then, we will hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll just be sitting by the television waiting for more Samurai Rabbit.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know that bats are mammals, and I embarrassed myself in front of Stan Sakai. I was just trying to describe, like most of his creatures, his people look like dogs and cats and things.
Lisa.
And bunnies.
You should not feel bad at all. I mean, the person who should be really embarrassed is your husband and all the terrible varieties of the way that he pronounces all these characters' names.
I felt vindicated because even the creative team doesn't all pronounce Usagi, the same.
Right.
And
it's okay.
Yeah, and I like to mix it up too. Why not have fun with sounds?
Yeah, we're doing a good job here. We're doing okay. But how wonderful was that conversation? Truly an honor to have Stan on the show, to have the Langdales on here, to have Kong Lee. Everyone was so generous with their time.
Do you know what I didn't consider?
What?
That even imaginary real estate costs money.
Yeah.
Where they're like, well, we have to make the roads angled at such a way that you can't look down a street, because looking down a street costs more money, or looking between buildings costs more money.
I mean, think about the creation of this show in lockdown, right? Like, there's no pen and paper, as they were saying. This is just ones and zeros. And the only people who were sharing a room were the Langdales. Everyone was doing these creative conversations across Zoom.
Digital animation is just the most perfect metaphor for the creative process.
Yeah.
Because the product is just ephemeral until someone who didn't have anything to do with the creation process gets to see it.
Yeah, something from nothing.
Or nothing from nothing.
Nothing for nothing. Ooh, getting deep here on Comic Book Couples Counseling. So yeah, there you go, everyone. That's our Samurai Rabbit, the Usagi Chronicles celebration episode.
I love it so much.
Yeah, and we're getting 10 more episodes.
So exciting.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch all of those, hopefully in one sitting.
Well, yes, we're definitely going to do it in one sitting, because this is a show I binge. There you go, my friends. Next week on the podcast, we are starting up a new couple series. We are discussing Angela and Sarah from Angela Asgard's Assassin from Marvel Comics, a series that listeners have been begging for 3 years. Jamie, Max, it's happening.
We see you.
We also have Kyle Starks coming on to talk about I Hate This Place from Image Comics and Skybound. And somewhere in there in the next couple of weeks, Brad is leaving Lisa for Anaheim, going to Star Wars Celebration. I'm pretty excited about it.
No hall passes.
Slave Leia's, stay away.
Of course, Oscar Isaac, open on both sides.
Agreed.
Yeah, so if he's there.
Yeah, all Moon Knights may enter. What a great way to end that episode, Lisa.
Well, we now know that there is enough of that guy to go around.
Okay.
So where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you, Brad?
You can find me on all social medias at MouthDork. If you have words of affirmation for our logo, you can send them to Aaron Prescott at A Cool Hand Fluke. And if you have some words of affirmation for our radical banner art and show poster, send them to Karen Charm at Karen_X-Men fan. Lisa, where can our listeners send their words of affirmation to you?
Oh boy, thank you for asking. I am always accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on Instagram and Twitter. Oscar Isaacs, slide into those DMs. If you'd like to spend more quality time with us,
quality.
You can subscribe to us on Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to get exclusive, you can join our Patreon, where you'll get more content, including weekly bonus episodes.
If you'd like to reach out and touch us electronically, you can email the podcast, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. You can visit our website, comicbookcouplescounseling.com, or follow us on Instagram and Twitter at CBCC Podcast.
You can give us the gift of 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to do an active service, why not write a review of the show while you're there?
Yeah.
We are fluent and receptive in all 5 love languages. It really warms our hearts and helps the pod.
So until next time, friends, keep your love tank full.
And your psychic rapport open.
Doopy doopy. Bum bum ba da bum bum ba da ba.